Welcome back, everyone, to Figuring Out the Formula. I'm Kyle. I'm here with Chandler and Patrick, as always. And this last weekend, we had the Qatar Grand Prix for Formula One, and it was a race to die for. I mean, it literally almost killed a couple people. The drivers were struggling. The cars were struggling. Pirelli was fighting for its life. Before we get into anything, let's pour one out for the homies. Cheers, boys.
Yes, sir.
Pat's
I don't
drinking
know if alcohol is legal in Qatar.
I mean, like I said, we'll pour one out for the homies.
That's right.
Pat's drinking a twisted tea, so I don't. If you brought one of those over to Qatar, boy,
they'd probably have a stroke.
Yeah, I mean, they'd be praying 5 times a day to you. I'm just saying. But let's jump right into the race weekend. This was a sprint race weekend, and I think that it could have been better. There were some positives, some negatives to the weekend. We'll get into all those, but let's start out with the qualifying session. So the qualifying, let me remind you guys, normally it's qualifying for the sprint, and then the sprint is for the race. That's what it's been in years past, but this year the FIA decided, let's put out a terrible product. So the qualifying session is actually for the Grand Prix on Sunday, not the sprint race on Saturday. So the qualifying session, it still is 3 sessions. In Q1 of the Qatar qualifying session, you had a ton of track limit infringements. So that means the drivers were going all 4 wheels over the white lines, like we've talked about in the past. The track limits for these drivers, I guess, were real tough all weekend long. But in Q1, the drivers that struggled the most were Zhou, Magnussen, Lawson, Stroll, and Sargent. So some pretty big names in there. I mean, Stroll is consistently out in Q1 now. It's gotten to the point where Fernando Alonso is light years ahead of him in the points. He's just struggling. And Pat, we did see some of that emotion come out after this qualifying session.
Yeah, it was actually pretty funny, at least from my perspective, because
you're not a trainer.
Lance Stroll is what we call a pay driver. He's really only there because of his dad. His dad owns the team. And he comes back in the pits and he takes his steering wheel, which costs anywhere from 80 to 100 grand, and casually just throws it out of the car. And then he gets out of the car, starts punching the wall, and also begins pushing his trainer out of the way and storms off. Quite literally like a little man baby. And then his interview with the media after he exited, honestly, Kimi Räikkönen-esque. He pretty much just said it was a shit day, and that was pretty much it, and left.
No, because Kimi is at least funny, right? Like Kimi during his interviews, they called him Iceman.
I said esque. I didn't say it was like Kimi. Okay, look.
I mean,
the point is he was pissy, which is how Kimi used to always talk.
It came off more whiny baby than Kimi just not giving a damn.
Yeah.
Kimi would be happy just doing anything he wanted other than being right there taking an interview.
Yeah. Bring back the old Kimi. Car was,
And there's some speculation that maybe his dad is getting ready to sell the team because his dad is a businessman of businessmen. He's really just looking for a profit, no matter how much he says he likes racing. And so I think Lance is one just kind of fed up with sucking, and two, he might know something in the background that, he may not be driving an F1 too much longer.
Papa Strolovich will not fire his own son. He would rather sell the team than fire his own son at this point. That's why I'm taking the stance of is that's how hell-bent Papa Lawrence Strolovich is on not firing his own son.
The fact that he drove with 2 broken wrists better than he has in the later end of the season so far it's beyond me. So I think we just need to move on from what's going on with Lance Stroll. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next controversial thing that happened during the qualifying session. It was the Delta times. So Pat, can you explain a little bit about what Delta times are?
Yeah, so the Delta times It's kind of just a mandate from the FIA as to a minimum lap time you have to have during qualifying. The reason this was brought in just very recent was because you normally have tons of drivers that, despite being an F1 driver and being elite, will sit basically going like 5 miles an hour in the middle of the track through the highest speed corners and almost causing crashes, week in and week out. And the FIA said, okay, we need to stop this. You should be prepared when you come out of the pits. And so they started implementing minimum lap times, which they just called the Delta. And if a driver, is going too slowly, the FIA will somewhat politely tell them to speed up. And then, if it gets egregious, then, I think they have some kind of penalty they'll assess, whether it's a grid penalty or lap deletion or things like that. Just because it's a big safety hazard for other drivers that are going full speed with, a car parked in the middle of the track.
Yeah. Chandler, I know you and we were texting a little bit during like the qualifying session when this happened, and you kind of talked a little bit about like, why is it just now a thing, right? Like we've on this podcast, we've talked about a couple different race weekends where we've seen people infringing on other laps, like qualifying laps. Why the fuck are they just, it was literally just, you heard about it. They're like, oh yeah, by the way, the FIA talked about this the night before qualifying and said, we're going to monitor this. It's like, so you have the power to do this, but you haven't done this all fucking year long. Why now?
Yeah, it's frustrating. I have to give, and I'm willing to give the FIA the benefit of the doubt that also what we haven't really ever talked about, and these used to be a lot more notorious than they have in the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years. But usually the day before, so usually the Thursday before race weekend, the FIA meets with the drivers in a drivers meeting. Where all 20 drivers is usually just the 20 drivers plus the FIA governing bodies, whether that be the stewards, race directors, whatever, talk about anything that may have happened or, hey, information about, local rules of, hey, you've got track limits on corners X, Y, and Z. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that this was probably told to them, so they knew about it. And the reason I say it's not as notorious is that back up until I want to say when Liberty Media took over in 2018, up before then, those were all televised or at least recorded, and you could go on the F1 website and watch them. If you go down the YouTube rabbit hole, some fantastic moments from the drivers' meetings and them calling each other out and like, let's stop. But I digress on that, is that I give them the benefit of the doubt, but at the same point, we're in round 17 of the season. And us as fans have never once heard of this. Not even like reports saying, hey, the FIA has issued a statement saying that you need to be careful or we will. It's just randomly, boom, here we are talking about deltas into qualifying in round 17 of 23 or 24 races. Why? It goes back to our running theme of the FIA and the lack of consistency, of course, this year. So it's just another example of we're falling down on its feet again. So that's kind of what we discussed in our group text about it.
Yeah, unfortunately, that wasn't the only thing this weekend that was inconsistent, unreliable, came out of the blue, just thrown upon the fans, the drivers, the teams. We'll talk a little bit later on about what else happened due to the FIA. Instead, before we get into all that, let's move into Q2. In Q2, you had Carlos Sainz. He was defending Max on outlaps. So for the new listeners, like the listeners who have never watched a Formula One race, qualifying is a timed event. You do not go out there racing other people. You go out there racing times. To block someone on a racetrack while they're qualifying, not even on a flying lap, is fucking ridiculous. Carlos Sainz should have got penalties from that. He didn't, and it didn't matter anyways, even if he would have. We'll talk about that. But I mean, this guy he didn't just like interfere or block a little bit. Like he literally was doing like blocking like this for like 3 different swerves. It's just like, what are you doing, bro? I mean, what was going on?
Full donkey. I mean, I don't know if it's like, you forgot this is just qualifying or what. Because it's a pretty simple concept. If you're not on a flying lap, get the fuck out of the way. But I guess he just didn't get the memo. Maybe the Ferrari fax machine is broken. I don't know.
Out in Q2, as a result from all that, you actually had Hulkenberg, Albon, Checo Perez. You had Carlos Sainz, who was blocking Max, so clearly it didn't work, and Yuki Tsunoda. So the major thing from those people that I just mentioned, yes, Carlos Sainz, that sucked for him. But, ball don't lie, karma's a bitch, whatever you want to call it, you're out in Q2. The other major thing is Checo Perez. So Checo was hauling ass. Like, he was probably going to be top 3-ish around there to leave Q2. Unfortunately, he crossed all 4 tires over the white line and got a track limits infringement. So his lap time was deleted and he was out in Q2. This track is something. I mean, you see it a lot in practice. You saw it a lot in qualifying. We saw it in the sprint and in the actual race. I want to talk about the track limits, but before I raise my blood pressure, we'll keep moving through qualifying and talk about that during the actual race event. So, moving from Q2 to Q3, you had George Russell. Gents, I don't know if you remember, but a couple races ago when Max Verstappen stopped in the pit lane, during the qualifying session, he waited for a gap to open up. George Russell and everybody else was bitching. Hey, he can't do that. He's blocking us. He needs to go. Chandler, the exact same thing happened during the Qatar Grand Prix. The only difference is it was not Max Verstappen. It was George Russell. The guy who was complaining the most that Max did this is now taking a page from his book. Can you explain why he would even think that he could get away with this?
Why he would think that he could get away from it is because he watched Max do it 2-3 races ago and get no penalty for it. So that's kind of, okay, well, there's the precedent. You didn't send him, you didn't give Max penalty. I can do it too. That's why he did it. But I mean, George Russell, if you had to ask me which F1 driver is most likely to throw stones from his glass house, it's George Russell. I mean, he knew good well that he was doing this. I mean,
100%.
It's shame on the FIA again, because it's not taking advantage of the rules. He's using the rules and the precedent to his advantage. So I can't fault him for doing it.
It really was. It was infuriating to me because, like you said, if you're going to bitch about something, you cannot do that something, right? Yes, that's part of the racemanship. Like, it's part of it. I get it. But you look like a fucking idiot. Plus, the FIA, after Max did it, said, okay, this should have been a penalty. We messed up. The FIA did not give the penalty to George Russell. I think starting now, they're going to be like, listen, this is a penalty. This is the precedent now. This is a fucking penalty. If you do this again, anybody, George, Max, don't give a fuck. Gunther, it doesn't matter. If you're sitting in the pit lane, your ass better be moving.
God forbid we wait till the constructor's title is wrapped up and the driver's championship is all but wrapped up at this point.
Yeah.
Let's just wait until after all that's over with. This is like the PGA Tour has their fall series after the Tour Championship. We just experiment with crap. You're gonna get me pissed off here, George Russell. Thank you for raising my blood pressure.
Well, yeah, I don't know where to go from there, but if we're going to talk about raised blood pressure, towards the end of qualifying session, keep in mind, this is for the starting positions of the race, not the sprint, the race. Max and Lando were hauling ass. I mean, it was so close to the top 3. So you had Max, Lando, and Oscar. Top 3 were so close. Well, it turned out that it was close for a reason. So the top 3 of the qualifying session were Max on pole, then you had George Russell, and then Lewis Hamilton, his teammate, actually was in third. The reason why Lewis was in third and not any McLarens was because Lando and Oscar's lap time ended up getting deleted. They had a track limit infringement, and boom. The thing is that really pissed me and McLaren fans off was that they had Lando Norris, who knew that he crossed over. Like, he knew he was getting that lap time deleted. They made him go to the interview, like the post-session interview on TV, and he sat there and listened to George Russell talk. After George Russell talked, while he was talking, you saw Lando walk behind him, and you see Oscar Piastri walk behind him. So at this point, you think, okay, George got third, Oscar Piastri's in second, and Max Verstappen got pole still. Oscar Piastri does his whole interview, and he's like, he's kind of like doing this the whole time. And Chandler, we find out that at the end, the person interviewing Oscar says, "Oh, by the way,
David Coulthard, David Coulthard, however you pronounce it." But first, again, shame on the FIA for making Liberty Sports Media, a former F1 driver who's doing an interview for Oscar. I mean, Oscar's been on the front row once, I think, at Spa. I mean, this is kind of the, McLaren's coming in their stride. Interviewing, well, Oscar, we just got news. Shame on the FIA.
The president's been shot.
I'm telling you right now that we had a good 5 minutes from the time that Oscar stepped up, from the time that he crossed that finish line to the time. How does the FIA take 5 minutes to see if he went over?
It doesn't. They know immediately. So the fact that they let him do a whole interview and then on international television, because it's all over the world, international television, be like, oh, by the way, we didn't really need to talk to you because you're not top three. Sorry. Actually, you're less than top three.
Just take a hike. Just take a hike.
Like that.
So all that shit, it frustrated the hell out of me. And you could tell the team was upset. Lando was upset with himself because he crossed over. Oscar was upset because he didn't realize he had a penalty until after he made himself look like a fool because he talked about how well he did.
I said Lando, I think, knew he was just there to get pulled off, but Oscar genuinely did not know.
Yeah. That was for the qualifying session. Let's move instead of to the sprint shootout where it's just another qualifying session that doesn't really fucking matter.
But wait.
Or does it?
But wait. So Qatar in October, early October, near the equator, kind of hot, pretty hot. I think that the track temperatures, they said, reached 30 something degrees.
Yeah, it was only 32 degrees
Celsius. Logan Sargent thought he was pulling up brought his ski clothes to go race, but everybody else knew that this was going to be pushing triple digits Fahrenheit. So anyhow, the tires were an issue in practice one. We saw this in practice one, and we saw this in qualifying. Overnight, the FIA realized, hey, these tires may be an issue, especially on corners 12 and 13 towards the end of the track. So we're going to revise our track limits as if track limits weren't already just, we weren't talking about track limits, right? Wrong. So then they said, we've got to run and make sure that everybody's right on this. So what do they do is that before the sprint shootout, so we have normally you got an hour practice, qualifying, call it an hour. I mean, it is an hour basically. So instead of normally having a sprint shootout, which lasts an hour, and then a sprint, which probably lasts, I'd say, about an hour-ish, maybe an hour and 15, let's throw in another session, as the FIA, to save themselves, calls it a familiarization session, since they revised the track limits.
Yeah, normally you pay extra for familiarization sessions, but
yeah, 10 minutes. So first off, that's maybe enough time for an out lap, a flying lap, and a cool down lap.
And a cigarette.
Do what?
Is that and a cigarette?
Right. Oh, yeah, and we're requiring all 20 drivers to go out on the track and run this just to be sure. And we're going to assess the tire situation. Mind you, and at this point, we're hearing rumors that Pirelli's signing another 4-year deal, and your tires are about to blow up. I mean, this is just, nothing was learned of it. I don't think really anybody took it too seriously because it's 10 minutes. What are you going to learn in 10 minutes? And all you're doing is saying, hey, you can't go off here at this turn. Okay, well, does that change strategies? Maybe for 1 or 2 drivers. But at the end of the day, your goal is to stay on the track the whole time. So, so now this is throwing a whirlwind into the sprint shootout and sprint. On top of that, FIA is not giving new sets of tires either for you to go familiarize with. You've got to go use another set of tires that you've either already used in their scrubs, which you're not really going to learn a lot because they're already degrading, or you got to go burn a new set. I am baffled. I am utterly baffled.
For
out to the sprint shootout. Sorry, that was just your little 10-minute familiarization. How screwed up the FIA is.
For an organization like the FIA to strive to be net zero, whatever, like recycling and, non-emissions, whatever their fucking hippie crap is that they're talking about doing, to just be wasting tires for a 10-minute session. Because once you use that tire, you can't use it in the race. You put one lap on it, it's done. No one's using scrub tires. It's just not going to happen.
Well, you can use scrub tires during a race.
It's very uncommon to use scrub tires in a race. Am I wrong?
It's less common.
We did see it this go around. We did see it, but
because they had to burn one. Yeah,
we'll see. We'll discuss why we saw it.
It's mainly come up because of these sprint shootouts.
Yes, but in a normal race weekend, you do not see that teams put because they're only pitting once, maybe twice. They're not putting on scrub tires. So moving from the familiarization session, I'm surprised I said that without fucking up, but let's jump right into the sprint, because the sprint shootout, I mean, it was just another qualifying session. No one crashed or anything like that, but for the sprint race, you actually had Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. They were up front racing their asses off. Except the only problem is they start on the medium compound tire. So for those who don't know, you have soft, medium, and hard compounds. The soft compound means you're quicker, but they do not last as long. So it's the exact opposite. The hard compound, you're not as quick as a soft compound, but you can use that tire for a lot longer, way more laps, that kind of thing. The medium is in the middle. So Lando Norris is on a medium tire. And for the majority of the top 10, they also were on medium tires. You had a few handfuls of drivers in there, though, that actually started on the soft tires. Now, keep in mind, we had all these sessions already. So drivers and teams should have an idea of what the tires are going to do. So teams like Mercedes decided to take a chance and use soft tires. Lando Norris, unfortunately, like I said, he was on a medium tire. So not as quick as a soft. He drops from second place starting out to sixth place on the grid. This was expected, but we didn't expect him to fall that much. So we say again, like in a sprint race, only the top 8 positions get points. Well, Lando Norris is 2 places away from losing out, like 3 places away from losing out on points. So it was a little frustrating at first, but we kind of see the strategy come in from the soft tires and the medium tires, that kind of thing. The thing I want to talk about with you, Pat, is we've done nothing but praise this guy all season long for what he's been able to accomplish in such a short amount of time. Liam Lawson, the AlphaTauri driver, he's, like we said, he's subbing for Daniel Ricciardo, who is subbing for Nick DeVries. Whatever you want to call it, he's the short-term substitute in the classroom. He's done great. Rookie, he's done great all season long. He finally made a mistake, though, and he lost the rear end of the car and ended up hanging out in the gravel. It caused a safety car, but are you as forgiving as I am? You're a Red Bull fan, so like seeing an AlphaTauri in the gravel, is it giving you like Vietnam flashbacks or
no? So this one, I mean, like we said, it's his first mistake. He's been driving really well so far this season. The thing that really mitigates it for me is just how this track is designed. So the curbs on this track are just terrible, to say the least. I mean, they'll chip your tires, they'll fuck up your car. They're absolutely terrible. I don't know who designed them. Maybe Chef Boyardee. Who knows? But the other thing
that can keep rolling. It rolls all the way down the hill to the grocery.
The other big thing was that if you were watching, you can easily see it. But as soon as you touch anywhere outside the track limits, there was sand everywhere, all over the tarmac. And so what would happen is, for those of you that don't know, sand actually will make things slipperier for those tires. And so, like Lawson, if you touch that at all, you're going to lose one of your wheels and then you're just going to spin. And we'll talk about it more later. He's not the only person that this happened to. But it was like they were just literally driving through the actual desert. There was sand flying everywhere. You really just can't control it if you touch it. And so it really wasn't that bad in my opinion. Plus it's only a sprint race.
And like you said, it was his first mistake.
Yeah. First major mistake that I think anybody's seen in F1 from him.
The opposite of the first mistake is Logan Sargent. I mean, I normally, first, the opposite of first is last. That's where Logan Sargent has been, will always be until he signs with Andretti in the future. Logan Sargent, he also ended up off the track. I mean, both these cars, like they ended up causing a safety car. So it's a great race. Like it leads to great action. It's a sprint race. It's already short. So to see safety cars, that really kind of gets the blood going, like you have all these cars on medium, you have some on soft, and now with all these safety cars, Chandler, the soft tires, I mean, they might last the whole time.
Yeah, I think that because this came out on lap 4, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that you look at it for 2 reasons. The soft strategy is not a bad idea because, one, we've learned in practice, qualifying, and obviously with this extra session of how bad the tires are.
Not a practice session.
Familiarization session.
Yeah.
The softs are not going to last very long. Softs, basically, I think whenever the FIA realized that, and I think that the teams obviously knew that, had their strategy, but going into this week after one practice, I think the teams realized, hey, softs are not going to cut it. We need to save maybe one set of softs to try and go get fastest lap at the end of the race if we're in a position to do so. But other than that, no need for softs. So I think that's why a couple of the teams put softs on during sprint, because only being 17 laps, I think what you're hoping for is get on the softs, get to about lap 8 or 9, have a safety car, come in, pit for mediums, and then you're in great position.
Yeah.
So I can't fault anybody that went on softs. I think the safety car came out a little early for the softs, but
yeah, because it worked. I mean, the people who had soft tires on, they
got the jump
advanced.
And you could have kept it. And then again, like I said, right as those softs are kind of hitting their peak around lap 4 or 5, you would have had about 2 really good laps. And about 6 or 7, maybe lap 8 is whenever it would have been hope for a safety car. So the safety car got triggered a little early, but can't fault the strategy. Think it's good. I think it's unfortunate for those. But at the end of the day, too, is like from George in the sprint shootout. Where did George and Lewis start out? I want to say they started out like 4th or 5th in the sprint shootout.
Yeah, because Lando dropped to 6th.
Yeah. So
you had George pass Lando
on mediums. They would have never gotten up to 2nd or 3rd. I think they would have fallen off because you look at the racecraft of the Red Bulls and McLarens. I don't think they ever sniff 4th or 5th if they don't have the softs. So it kind of worked for them. It would have worked a lot better had the safety car come out later. So
yeah,
that's where I think we see the softs kind of shine, was in this stint like this.
Well, it wasn't just the initial start of the race, right? So the Logan Sargent going off track, leading to the safety car, that naturally leads to a restart. Well, yes. George Russell is leading the race at this point in time, and he had Oscar Piastri behind him in 2nd place. So, Oscar is on the mediums, George is on the softs, as we said. George completely catches Oscar Piastri napping. I mean, he was tucked in, binky in his mouth. He was out like a light, warm glass of milk. Oscar Piastri fell asleep at the wheel. I mean, if he was out on 575, he would have got a DUI ticket because he was sleeping that much. The thing is, Oscar Piastri, he's not up in the front a lot. So, yes, he is a professional. He's won, F2, F3 championships. Dude should know when someone's going to go, or at least have a good idea. I mean, there was within 3 corners, there was like a 2.5 second lead already.
Yeah. I think this happens a lot more than you would think with people getting caught sleeping at the wheel on a restart. And that's the real advantage you have being at the front during a safety car is you get to decide when everybody else goes. And it's pretty much just as long as you do it before the safety car line. And he gets caught lacking for once. Oscar's been pretty solid this year, I'd say myself. But I also don't really think it worried them too much. As McLaren, I think, at least for the sprint, was trying to play a much longer game because of all the tires and things like that Chandler talked about earlier.
Yeah, the only thing McLaren didn't need was another safety car later on in the race.
Yep.
So around lap 11, those medium tires that Oscar had actually started coming alive, and the soft tires that George Russell had, I mean, they didn't just hit a wall. They ran right through that fucking wall. The tires, like Oscar Piastri, I think I heard it was like 0.8 of a second faster every lap than George Russell was, which in F1 is
a lot.
Yeah, more. I think there was the last two.
There might have been, yeah.
They got over a second.
Yeah, that's crazy. So great planning by McLaren. And honestly, racing is a lot of skill, but it's a good bit of luck as well. So the only thing is, like I said, McLaren didn't want another safety car because then everyone could get a cheap pit stop and go from there. Well, after lap 11, you had Oscar regain the lead. Luckily, this happened after Oscar regained the lead, but on the same lap, you had 3 cars get into an accident. You had Esteban Ocon, Checo Perez, and you had Nico Hülkenberg. Checo Perez was shooting it down the inside, trying to make an overtake on 2 cars, and ended up squeezing. Him and Ocon squeezed Nico Hülkenberg into an accident. To say it was anyone's fault would be a shame. I don't think that you can blame anyone in this accident. Because there was space open, and then out of nowhere, the real estate just disappeared. So Nico Hülkenberg couldn't fall back, and you couldn't have Checo. Checo was already there, and then Esteban Ocon was on the outside, going to be the inside on the next turn. So
I don't know. I don't quite agree with that. I feel like you could blame Ocon for this one.
Let me hear it.
Because, obviously he can't see Sergio Perez, but after turn 1, when they make a right turn, Hulk is ahead and Ocon's trying to catch up before turn 2, and it's not even halfway alongside. And instead of backing out and, playing it safe, he drifts his car wide right into Hülkenberg and then to Checo and causes the whole collision when he, in my opinion, should have just backed out of it.
I mean, you say that, but it is a sprint race, and this was already lap 11 and a half. They were running out of time, and Esteban Ocon has a chance to get 2 places. It's not like like we've seen from Checo in the past couple of weeks where there's no shot of making a pass here. Esteban Ocon probably could have made that pass, but like you said, he had a slight wiggle, and then kind of the car got loose, like it did the little twitch, and then he kind of went up into Hulk. Do I agree? Do I hear what you're saying? Yes. I think it was just a racing incident. And we saw that the FIA actually agrees with me. Surprise, surprise. I mean, make me in charge. They did not give a penalty for any of those drivers. Do what?
I said you would do better than the actual FIA.
I could use that check right about now too.
That's right.
Yeah, they didn't. No one got a penalty for that racing incident. So I hear what you're saying, Pat. But in all honesty, if Ocon had the grip, he would have made that pass on both of them, or at least Hulkenberg would have seen both of them in his mirrors and backed out. I know that's not his responsibility to do, but to take care of your car, sometimes drivers do that. What?
I don't agree with you, but I see your point, but I don't agree with you.
I don't remember it off the top of my head of the individual. I've always kind of had the mindset of if you can't see the side pod of the car outside of you, it's a racing incident, or the car that's ahead needs to. I don't know. And so for this one, I would say, all right, does Sergio see the race pod, the side pod of Hulkenberg?
Sergio had no way of avoiding this. This was not Sergio's fault.
Based off the Hulkenberg's overhead. Sergio's not at fault. Does Hulkenberg see the even if Hulkenberg did, like if Ocon was past him, I don't think Hulkenberg could have backed out because Sergio's there. So I think it's just such a cluster that you got to chalk it up. It's kind of like, it's like offsetting penalties in football of like, hey, if there's multiple people at fault, then we just know nobody's at fault. Essentially, I think that's it. That's kind of worst case scenario. It comes down to that. But and again, not seeing that still shot of each over the overheads, I can't remember off the top of my head. So I'm not really providing much to this, but that's just kind of my thought on like general.
I mean, Pat, we're just gonna have to agree to disagree here, even though I have the full backing and support of the FIA. I mean, it is what it is. We'll just move on.
Yes, a lot, but all right.
Yeah. I have the FIA on my back. You have a Twisted Tea. Unless it turns into the Twisted Tea video where that dude like whops that guy over the head.
Hey, I can come through the screen right now if I have to, bro.
No, please. So after that lap 11 incident, it actually led to a safety car. Surprise, surprise. We talked about McLaren not wanting a end of race safety car. Well, it happened. Luckily, Oscar Piastri did not sleep because he was the one in charge of the restart. George Russell was not fooled. Oscar tried to leave early just like George had previously, and George was right there the whole time. He just didn't have the speed. He didn't have the grip to keep up with Oscar. So you had Oscar Piastri in first. Then you had George Russell second, Max in third, Lando in fourth during that restart. So after the restart, you had a huge battle. So Max passed George Russell with ease, and George wanted to stay on the podium, if you will, for the sprint race. You get a nice battle, though, Lando and George Russell. So to finish out the sprint race, Chan, we had Oscar Piastri, who gets his first ever win, if you will, in Formula One. You had Max Verstappen in second, which Oscar over Max, bang.
Love points for McLaren. That's all I'll say about a sprint race.
Absolutely. Then in third place, you had Lando Norris. So a double podium for McLaren, which without ruining the race, it was the theme for the race weekend. Before we move into the actual race section of the race weekend, let's pull into Pat's paddock and discuss a little bit about this great country that we are racing in today.
So welcome back to Pat's paddock, everybody. Today we're going to talk about where we're racing. We're racing in the not beautiful country of Qatar. Now, this is a place that the only reason I personally heard of it before the last 3 years was from a Transformers movie where there was one scene there. That's it. So Qatar is one of, no, I'm telling you, Transformers 1, the opening scene is in Qatar. Now, Qatar is part of, a large group of Middle Eastern countries that form OPEC because their main export is natural gas and petroleum. It's a tiny little country on the east coast of Saudi Arabia, and they have actually become, other than Saudi Arabia itself, the second biggest proponent of what's called sports washing, which is what we're talking about today. Now, sports washing is essentially paying lots of money to invest in sports to try to distract from pretty much everything else shitty about your country. In this case, human rights violations, the economy, et cetera, the climate, I could go on and on. They already stole a World Cup from the rest of the world somehow.
Allegedly.
Yeah. Allegedly. But the reason why you can have a track where, like we've talked about, it chews up the tires, it's super fucking hot, which we'll talk more about that later. The track itself just sucks. It's bland. Like, you can't really figure out where people are. The drivers can't figure out where they are. The track limits suck. It's all because of one 5-letter word for happiness called money. And essentially Qatar a couple years ago, I guess, just decided to start splashing the cash because places like the UAE, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia were all doing it too. And I guess the pockets of Formula One management were big enough. And now we race in a place like this, which, we'll talk more about the end of, maybe there's some hope we don't keep racing here. But if you're wondering why we're racing in the middle of fucking nowhere in the Middle East, in a country you've never heard of or will never go to, it's all because of sports washing.
So Pat talks a little bit about the negative effects that money can have in Formula One. We talk about sports washing. We talk about the Stroll family, pay to play, that kind of thing. But the good part about money in Formula One is for people like Max Verstappen. So after the sprint race, Max Verstappen was crowned a world champion. So it's his third Drivers' World Championship, and you get a lot of money with that. You deserve it. This is, Pat, you could say this is one of the best seasons one single driver has ever had. It's
100%.
Whether you like him or not, the records that he's broken, the things that he's done, granted, it is the car, but he is a hell of a driver as well. To become a 3-time world champion in a sprint race, Chandler, that's got to be like the weirdest thing ever, because it's not even a real race at that point in time. And
it's weird. It's weird, but it is the way that Max Verstappen has won all 3 of his championships have been weird. So 2021, very controversial. The whole Michael Massey, pulling in, letting the cars in between 1 and 2, like the number 1 and 2 people go. That's that was weird. We're not going to dive too much into that. Then last year, we go to Japan, and it is the monsoon pouring down rain in which the damn tow trucks on the racetrack that almost gets, like, Yuki Tsunoda almost gets, Pierre Gasly almost gets killed for running it, like, by almost running into it. So they made it a shortened race. I don't even remember how many laps.
He found out afterwards.
Yeah, because they did
in the media pen.
Yeah, they made it a 0.5-point race because they only ran a couple of green flag laps. I think they were behind safety car. So in the cool down room, they told him in the cool down room, "Hey, you're world champion." So that's how he found out his second world champion. And then now his third world championship is obviously we knew what the math came out, so it wasn't a shock or surprise. But to go second in a sprint race, and realistically, we knew it as soon as Checo went out on lap 11. That's it, game over. Mm-hmm. So really, it's kind of just odd. But kudos to Max, a generational talent. I really think that whether you agree or disagree with 2021's result of that kind of snafu, Max has backed it up. These past 2 years, there is no dispute that he was going to win a world championship at some point, and he's done it in some just major fashion.
How long? A quick answer here. How long do you think Max Verstappen can win a championship, in a row? He's at 3 in a row right now. Do you think he goes for 4?
He could get 4 next year, and then 2025. I think he gets 5 in a row, and then 2026. It's kind of all bets are off with the regulation changes, and we saw that with Mercedes. The tide turned once we got these new regs. Now it's Red Bull's turn. What happens to 26? Who knows? But I do think that he could go 5 straight.
So, real quick, I I think you could be correct, but I also think it depends on Red Bull's second driver. So right now, if they keep Checo Perez, then yes, you're 100% correct. Max Verstappen doesn't have any people to fight against. But if Checo is gone, whether that be after this season or after next season, 2025, that could be, if they have a good, decent second driver, that could be a real challenge to him.
Mm-hmm.
Pat, let's get away from this sprint race. Me and Chandler, we were happy with it. Oscar got his first win. Lando was on the podium as well. Let's move to the actual race section of the race weekend, though. So the Qatar Grand Prix, you wake up in the morning, it's still hot as balls, and you look and see a text message from your pals at the FIA. This text message reads something along the lines of, "Hey, motherfucker, I know normally you only pit once or twice. We're going to make you pit 3 times at least. You might have to pit 4. What would be your reply to that text message? And can you explain why this hypothetical is significant?"
Yeah, so I'd probably tell you to take a hike. So going back to some previous lessons we've talked about, Formula One, you don't refuel. The way they, kind of enforce strategies by making the tires scrape at certain rates, so that you have to go and actually do pit stops. And while Pirelli has a pretty hard job, this track just really fucked up their tires. And the thing is, I love pit stops. It's my favorite part of the race. We'll talk more about some pit stops later, but because of them mandating 3, which 3 is a lot for a single race, it just makes it far harder to actually strategize. 1, 2, it's far harder as a viewer to figure out, who's actually, moving up the pack versus they're just waiting to pit, et cetera, et cetera. And then one of the biggest ones is just on the drivers. We're going to talk about this more later, is they're essentially just constantly running qualifying laps the entire race. Now, why is that a big deal, you might ask? Qualifying laps, you're pushing flat out the entire time with maximum G forces the entire lap. In qualifying, you're doing that, once every 20 minutes or so. But doing it for 57 laps straight, it actually takes a very physical toll on your body. And while these are the most, elite athletes in the world, it's really like, imagine telling a fighter pilot to just do loops for, I don't know, 45 minutes straight. They'll pass out, and it just makes it much harder to watch as a viewer and much harder to actually physically compete in as a racer. Pit crew's got a lot of practice, which was great. And I love lots of pit stops, but it's just a lot more confusing to watch. You really can't track the action.
I think that's the main focus, the main problem that I had with this mandatory stop. So 18 laps at the most for a set of tires. It's difficult to track in a regular race who is on what cycle. Why is this person leading this person right now when they were way below them earlier, right? And then when you add 3, and we even saw 4 stops in this race, when you add those and you're trying to expand your market to new viewership, but there's no graphics to tell you which stop they're on, laps since last pit stop or pit stop number 2, whatever it might be, right? There's no graphics to tell you what's going on. I think this is more a complaint against Liberty Media, because they should have had that kind of stuff, right? Maybe it's FIA. I don't know who controls the information that's put out, but to see all of that going on, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I lost track.
Oh yeah.
At one, I'm like, all right, we'll either see a safety car and they'll explain it, or we wait another 20 minutes and then shit'll straighten itself out. Either way, I'll wait until then and see what's actually going down. Like, I couldn't track, like, Lando Norris at one point was way down there. Then I look up and he's, in second place. I'm like, well, I had no idea which place he was actually running in, right?
Williams car led the race at one point.
Alex Albon, baby.
My 5-second rant is I blame the FIA for making this decision at the last minute, which did not give the ample time to the media broadcasting crew to make something up for this.
That's fair. That is a fair point. The thing is, Pat talked a little bit about like this being a very physical race, the heat, driving full out the entire time, 57 laps. One driver who didn't have to worry about that was Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz decided he'd rather play golf at the Ryder Cup than focus on Formula One. He had a fuel leak in his car. I don't know if he got a little too drunk Saturday night. I'm not sure, but
don't put this on Carlos. Don't put this on Carlos. Can't. Ferrari's gonna Ferrari.
Okay, yeah.
No,
fair.
This is coming back to what I was talking about with how shitty this track is. Like the curbs were god awful, and I guess at some point during the sprint or whatever, Carlos Sainz took too much curb, and because the underside of his car is hitting the curb, it rattles everything else, and then the fuel bladder got a puncture. Like it's, for those of you who don't know, in an F1 car, the fuel tank is not an actual tank. It's just like a rubber bladder that's designed to actually move, but it eventually got it. Yeah, it's like a camelback. But, the curbs were so bad that it was rattling his car around, and then it punctured something and started leaking fuel, which you can't fix that fast enough.
No. And we'll talk about it in a second, but it was actually a blessing in disguise that he didn't start. Granted, he didn't get points or anything like that, but he also didn't have to struggle with those external forces like the heat, the temperature, all that stuff, worrying about the tire degrading, pit stops, all that shit that normally you look forward to in a race was nothing but a headache during this one. Mm-hmm. Moving from Carlos, though, let's actually get to the race start. So the first lap of the race, we say again, we had the soft versus medium compound, like tire compound battle, right? The Mercedes, once again, went to the soft compound. I guess they didn't learn their lesson from the sprint race or the familiarization session, but that shit does not last long. So they were really counting on a safety car to start out the race. Make those passes, get the safety car, put on a medium real quick, and be good to go.
Funny you say that.
Why are you saying that?
Just because there was a safety car on the first lap. They caused it to themselves. Little Nico Rosberg, Lewis Hamilton 2016 crime on Mercedes crime. Lewis ends up taking full responsibility for this. George really didn't have a whole lot of place to go. But again, why are we putting ourselves in a position to where we can take each other out of the race?
So explain a little bit about what actually happened.
Going down turn one, right-hand turn off the get-go, and almost, we talked in kind of more in depth and had a little bit of debate about the Hülkenberg Perez Ocon situation. Not necessarily a sandwich per se, but Russell couldn't go inside because he had, I can't remember which car was off of his tail on the inside, so he really couldn't. Lewis turned in. I really do think that it was Lewis that did turn in on this. But as a result, George kind of got stuck right there between a rock and a hard place. Lewis got hit, spun Lewis out. Kind of oddly enough, I saw some Mercedes fans and even some people that were close to Mercedes who were basically saying, flashback to Silverstone when Max had that 51G crash where I remember this was long before our podcast. We were like, how is Max at fault? But very similar to how that way it looked right at the point of contact. And even Mercedes fans and some Red Bull fans are like, okay, well, now we see why Max was at fault because he did kind of turn in. So yeah, Lewis at first, obviously, very heated in the moment. Yeah. George from the get-go was like, I had nowhere to go. Like, are you kidding me? What's going on? Lewis did admit fault on that, but Lewis took himself right out of the race on turn one of lap one. and got the safety car that George and Mercedes were hoping for, right?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it was that specific one, but that was their plan.
And I was because it did drop George all the way down to 18th place as soon as that happened.
Yeah. So keep in mind, now you have Carlos Sainz, who didn't start the race, and then you had Lewis obviously retire. So
18th of 18th.
So George Russell during the restart was in last, like you said. The thing is, you had at the start of the race, you had Nico Hulkenberg. So Carlos Sainz did not start the race. His grid place was empty. So naturally, if there's an empty spot in Formula One, you have offset. So you have one here, then one here. And it goes all the way down to 20 plus spots, right? Well, when someone does not start a race, but still qualifies, then you have to leave this place open and just fill in right here. Even though this one's empty, you have to go back to this place. Well, Nico Hulkenberg, I don't know if he lost his train of thought or whatever. Like we've talked about it, like during a formation lap, your engineers cannot talk to you. So Nico Hulkenberg just filled in like regular. He went to this spot and ended up.
I think what it was is, so obviously you've got the offset. I think he was supposed to be here, and he just pulled up here. So he actually went up a place in front of the person.
He pulled up just too far, which, I mean, I can't blame him for it, to be honest. Just getting so used to seeing a car in front of you.
I would do it.
And then the other problem is, I don't know. I don't think anybody else like pulled into his spot behind him. But the other thing is, one, you can't go in reverse on the starting grid. And two, it's hard enough to go in reverse in an F1 car anyways, because the gear is super fragile. So it's pretty much, he got there and he was just like, well, shit. I mean, another hospital.
We're fucked. Yeah. So Nico actually got a 10-second time penalty for that. I mean, obviously he was in the wrong. There's nothing to argue about there. You pay attention and you don't make those mistakes. The thing is, with mistakes, that was his fault. The mistakes of the FIA and the Qatari government scheduling a race for this time of year is fucking insane. You had drivers passing out. You had drivers throwing up. You had Fernando Alonso, for example. He was on the radio saying, hey, throw some water on me, on my seat. I don't care where you throw it. Just give me water, because my seat is so hot right now. Like, I can't stand it. The thing is, boys, the fact that we're racing in this heat at this track, doing Pirelli's bidding, if you will, it is crazy to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's. I think they we talk about the track temperature being about 32, 33 degrees Celsius, which is pushing 95 degrees Fahrenheit. There were talks, I know on the broadcast, Crofty and crew were. I think Ted mentioned that the driver cockpit was pushing 55 degrees Celsius, which is close to, off the rough estimate in my head, that's pushing over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Mm-hmm. Mind you, you have a super hot engine right behind your head, because the exhaust sits basically about right behind their head, so that's not helping.
55 degrees Celsius is 131 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, okay. I didn't know if it quite got 130, so yeah, it did. And you're looking at that for an hour and a half of sitting in on top
of high G's. Yeah.
On top of that, you got high G's, and your fire suit is not known for being a cooling suit. It's prevent fire. So you may have seen, I know that Max Verstappen and some other folks have the vests that have like the little like dry ice in them. But those are melted, by lap.
Like that. Yeah.
So, we started to see some complaints from, grizzled veterans like Fernando Alonso, who's saying, just throw water on me. Like, he's not asking for you to refill his drink. He's saying, take a bucket of water and pour it on my ass. Yeah, I don't know if we want to continue to go into what we've seen throughout the race. We want to come back.
I mean, I think it needs to be said, like,
looking at other drivers, obviously Fernando was the first one to really complain about it. Esteban Ocon did not say anything until the end of the race, but he said, like, came over to his engineer. He says, "Yeah, this was brutal. I didn't want to tell you guys, but I threw up in my helmet on around lap 15."
when he said that, Chandler, when he said that, I thought of the meme with the cat with like milk coming down. And so like, Mom, I froed up.
Yeah, just because what you may not, I didn't think of it. It got worse after I thought about it more because the drivers aren't taking their, like me just putting a helmet on. No. They've got the heat mask that comes and covers their mouth. So it's that cotton cloth of just right here.
Did you not see the interview with Ocon and fuck? Who's the guy?
Was it Coulthard again? Coulthard?
No. The guy from Drive to Survive who also does the interviews. Buxton, yeah. So you had him with Buxton, and Will Buxton asked him, like, did you swallow it? Like, what did you do with the throw up?
No, this is like, Will Buxton, shut up and go cover stuff because this stuff needs to be left unsaid.
Esteban Ocon said, "Yeah, I ate it," and Will's like. And he's like, "Bon appetit." And he said, "No, I'm just kidding." He's like, I'm just kidding. He's like, "It's in the floorboard." He's like, I didn't swallow it, but
then so you got those then kind of flash forward, it was Lance Stroll we've talked about already. Him getting out of the car after the race. First off, I didn't see, like we talked about earlier, I didn't see this video after, is he got out of the car and like was half like stumbling over till he grabbed the ambulance to like say, "Need some help."
He looked like McConaughey in Dallas Buyers Club.
Oh God, I don't know if that might be worse. But anyhow, you have him, and then he actually said, because so he got penalized. We'll talk about track limits. We'll talk about it again. They asked him about getting track limits penalties, and he said, "I think it's a joke that we're giving out track limit penalties whenever we got drivers about to pass out." And they're like, "Wait a minute, what?" And he was like, "Yeah, like we got on that straight." He's like, "I was blacking out on that straight because on the main straightaway because of how hot and how like G-force there was."
So Chandler talks a little bit about like the track limits and all that. Well, we saw a shit ton of penalties for track limit infringement. So the black and white flag given the warning, and then the next one being a 5-second time penalty. Well, the following drivers received multiple penalties. So you had Checo, you had Alex Albon, Pierre Gasly, and Lance Stroll. So all of which were struggling with track limits. Now, during the race, we were pissed off, thinking like, just fucking keep it between the white lines. And then after, when you hear the stories about them getting sick or passing out mid-lap or throwing up on themselves, whatever it might be, then you're like, okay, I apologize.
Maybe I was a little harsh.
Yeah, I'm being a dick. I'm sitting in my fucking air-conditioned room right now drinking. So it's my bad. But I think the main thing, like when I started hearing like Fernando Alonso talking about his seat catching on fire, like I was like, okay, is this he's overheating or is this an actual fire? And then I realized it wasn't his actual seat that was on fire. It was the McLaren pit crew. Chandler, what is the world record for the fastest pit stop in Formula One?
It is now 1.80 seconds.
Bang. What do you mean now?
McLaren will sometimes just descend from the heavens and hit us with an all-timer pit stop at the most perfect time. Usually it's at 1.9 whenever we don't. McLaren was on top of it today. McLaren crew knew it was hot and said, "We're getting out of this and back into the garage as quick as possible." Because they hit the ultimate bang with a 1.80 pit stop on Lando Norris. And world record, by the way, a world record for this. The best thing, if you go watch the video of the DHL pit stop, the angle of it is even the Alfa Romeo mechanics right in front who are kind of holding the power cords. One of them just sits there and watches the Lando drive off and just go.
I love that.
Like he knew at that point, just like we all knew. Bang. That's it.
I'm a Red Bull fan. I love fucking pit stops. Before this, all the like top like 12 pit stops were all Red Bull all day. That was one of the most impressive things I've ever fucking seen. I didn't even realize they put 4 tires on. I just saw Lando pull in and pull the fuck out. I mean, hey, my hat's off to them. That was fucking impressive. And I'm hoping Red Bull beats them again, but I mean, I recognize
Eat
Green is
shit.
what I see it.
It's gonna be tough.
Yeah, if you beat 1.8, then you deserve it. I mean, not 1.89, not 1.85. But if you beat 1.80,
We were
okay,
1/100th of a second from 1.7 time.
that's wild.
That's
The other wild thing is like Max Verstappen. He wins the race. Who would have thought, right? Oh wait, no, he's done that a fuck ton of times this year. There was no surprise with Max winning the race. He's already world champion at this point. Why not cap off the race with a win? You did, however, like I said, in the sprint race, the McLarens came in for another double podium. So, Chandler, you had Oscar again lead Lando Norris. Oscar gets second place. Lando Norris gets third place. So, before we get into our predictions and who was right and who was wrong, do you think that McLaren is here? Or do you think that it's just coincidence the last couple races?
I really do. I really think they're here.
I love to hear it. I love to hear it because I'm all here for it. The thing is, it sucks because the picking order for the US Grand Prix is going to be Chandler, who picked Oscar Piastri, finished second. Then you have Patrick, who picked Lando Norris, finishing third. And then I picked Charles Leclerc, who was behind them, so it doesn't fucking matter. The next race, like I said, is the US Grand Prix. Instead of recording the actual race weekend like we're doing for this race, I want to talk about our experiences at the US Grand Prix last year. So for those of you listening, we went, the three of us, as well as one of Patrick's family members, and we had a lot of good times. We made a lot of good memories, that kind of thing. Did some stuff that we want to talk to you guys about. So instead of doing a regular episode next episode, it is going to be stories from Austin. So we are still going to do the picks for the US Grand Prix just to keep it moving, mainly because I lost. So I want to make sure that I get a redemption here. So the US Grand Prix is going to be October 20th to the 22nd with another sprint race. So unfortunately, that didn't happen last year when we were there, but it is what it is. The sprint race is going to be Saturday at 6 p.m., while the race is going to be Sunday at 3 o'clock. So, boys, we are not going to pick the sprint race. We are only picking the actual US Grand Prix. So, Chandler, the honor's yours. Who is your pick to win the US Grand Prix this year?
I'm going with the other man in pie. I'm going Lando gets back on top of Oscar this go around.
Okay. So Chandler picks Lando. Pat, who is your pick?
I think I'm going to switch it up, and I'm going to go with Carlos Sainz.
Okay. All right. I would be a fool not to pick the other McLaren at this point in time. I guess I'm not a fool then because I'm picking Oscar Piastri. So imagine picking a Ferrari. What an idiot. That's a sure way to pick last on the next race. But so, like I said, the US Grand Prix, the actual race is going to be Sunday at 3 p.m. I really look forward to talking about our experiences from the US Grand Prix last year. If you have any questions or want to hear any stories specifically about what we did, what we experienced, what the actual track was like,
what food we ate,
whatever the food we ate,
the bars we went to,
whatever it is, please comment down below. And it was a really good time. It was an event that I won't ever forget, and hopefully we can go back and sit even closer.
I don't know if that's possible.
I know,
but out of where we were at, but it was a memory that we'll have together.
Absolutely. So that concludes this episode of the Qatar Grand Prix. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe at Figuring Out the Formula. Thank you.